Here's something the Zephyrian Empire never quite grasped about evolutionary biology. Apex predators don't usually advertise their status with flashy displays. They tend to be remarkably polite. But when your entire civilization has built itself around the charming notion that bigger guns equal bigger respect, subtlety becomes a foreign concept, which explains why Commander Vex'tar was currently watching a human diplomat apologize for the third time in 10 minutes and wondering if this species had somehow evolved without spines. Ambassador Thorne, Vex'tar's voice carried the particular brand of condescension reserved for creatures he considered beneath notice. Surely your people understand that the Kepler mining rights belong to whoever can defend them? His scaled fingers drummed against the negotiation table's surface, each tap designed to remind everyone present that Zephyrian claws could punch through most known metals. Marcus Thorne, a man whose greatest visible threat was his tendency to over-organize his briefing materials, smiled with the kind of patience usually reserved for explaining basic mathematics to particularly slow children. Of course, Commander, we simply hoped to reach a mutually beneficial arrangement that avoided unnecessary complications. The assembled alien delegates exchanged what could generously be called meaningful glances. High Merchant Krill of the Nexari Trade Consortium actually chuckled, a sound like grinding crystal that made the universal translators work overtime. Complications? Is that what humans call military action these days? Now here's where things get interesting from a xeno-psychological perspective. Every species in that room had achieved interstellar travel through some combination of conquest, cunning, and catastrophic resource wars. They understood power in terms of fleet tonnage and planetary bombardment capabilities. What they were witnessing, humans consistently choosing negotiation over annihilation, struck them as either evolutionary impossibility or cosmic joke. "We prefer to think of violence as a failure of imagination," Thorne replied, making a small notation in his ever-present tablet. The man treated diplomatic incidents like accounting discrepancies, which probably explained why half the galaxy considered humanity a minor administrative inconvenience rather than a legitimate civilization. Vex'tar leaned forward, his reptilian features arranged in what his species considered an intimidating expression but which mostly resembled acute indigestion. "Your mining colonies in the outer spiral have been relocated twice. Your response was to file formal complaints with the Galactic Mediation Board." "Paperwork does have its merits," Thorne agreed cheerfully. "Your cargo vessels have been interdicted, your crews detained, your trade routes disrupted." Vex'tar's voice rose with each accusation, as if volume might finally provoke some recognizable response. "All documented and properly reported through appropriate channels." The silence that followed carried the weight of collective alien bewilderment. Here was a species that had somehow achieved faster-than-light travel, established colonies across 3 spiral arms, and developed technology that occasionally made other civilizations nervous. And their primary response to aggression was strongly worded letters. What none of them had bothered to ask, of course, was what exactly those appropriate channels were designed to prevent. Krill's crystalline laugh grew sharper. "Perhaps humans simply lack the genetic capacity for proper warfare? Some species evolve as prey, after all." The comment drew appreciative rumbles from the Corvin delegation, whose idea of diplomacy involved displaying their collection of enemy skulls. Ambassador Thorne's response was to offer more coffee, actual Earth coffee, which had become something of a diplomatic currency due to its peculiar effect on alien nervous systems. "We found that caffeine helps facilitate productive discussions," Thorne explained, pouring himself a cup with the steady hands of someone utterly unbothered by the casual insults flying around the room. "Though I should mention, we've received word that 3 more Zephyrian patrol fleets have entered the Deneb sector without proper transit authorization." Vex'tar's eyes narrowed to predatory slits. "Those are sovereign Zephyrian operations in disputed territory." "Ah," Thorne made another note. "I'll need to update the incident report then. That brings us to, let's see, 47 unauthorized incursions this quarter." The casual way he delivered this information, like a librarian discussing overdue books, sent a ripple of something approaching respect through the non-human delegates. Either humans possessed the galaxy's most sophisticated passive-aggressive tendencies, or they were documenting everything for reasons nobody had quite figured out yet. You realize, growled Corvin War Chief Brutax, whose name was apparently chosen by committee of particularly unimaginative violence enthusiasts, that most species would have declared blood feuds over far less provocation? Blood feuds do seem terribly inefficient, Thorne mused. All that resource allocation toward mutual destruction when you could be building infrastructure or advancing scientific research. We've run the economic models. Warfare has a remarkably poor return on investment. This was apparently the wrong thing to say to a room full of beings whose entire cultural identity revolved around glorious combat and honorable death. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees as multiple species contemplated whether humans were the galaxy's most advanced pacifists or simply its most elaborate cowards. Vex'tar stood abruptly, his 7-foot frame designed by evolution to intimidate prey species into submission. Perhaps it's time humans learned what happens when diplomacy fails. Oh, we're quite familiar with that scenario, Thorne replied, his tone remaining conversational despite the obvious threat. We've prepared extensive contingency protocols for such situations. Very thorough documentation, actually. Our military analysts are remarkably detail-oriented. The word military hung in the air like an unexpected punchline. Several delegates actually looked around to see if they'd missed some obvious joke. Humans had military analysts? What did they analyze? The most polite ways to surrender. Your military, Krill repeated slowly, consists of what exactly? Strongly worded ultimatums. Thorne's smile never wavered, but something flickered behind his eyes, gone too quickly for the aliens to interpret, but present long enough to suggest that perhaps they were asking the wrong questions entirely. We prefer to think of our defense forces as a last resort, he said, rather like a fire extinguisher. You hope never to need it, but when you do... He left the sentence hanging, returning to his paperwork with the air of someone who had just discussed the weather rather than delivered what might have been either a threat or a promise. The attack on the civilian transport Harmony's Dream happened on a Tuesday, which somehow made it worse. There's something particularly offensive about interstellar war crimes committed on weekdays. It suggests a disturbing lack of dramatic timing on the part of the perpetrators. Vex'tar's strike force had intercepted the vessel 3 light hours from the Proxima station, ostensibly searching for contraband materials. What they found instead were 200 human families relocating to the agricultural colonies, along with enough personal belongings to stock a small museum of domestic banality. The Zephyrians, apparently expecting hidden weapons or military intelligence, instead discovered children's toys, family photographs, and approximately 47 different varieties of houseplants. The disappointment must have been crushing. Regrettable incident, Vex'tar announced during the emergency session convened 6 hours later. His tone suggested he found it about as regrettable as missing lunch. Civilian vessel failed to comply with lawful inspection protocols. Ambassador Thorne listened to this explanation while methodically organizing his files, a habit that had begun to unnerve the alien delegates in ways they couldn't quite articulate. There was something unsettling about watching someone treat mass casualties like a clerical error. I see, Thorne said finally. And the 17 fatalities? Unfortunate but necessary enforcement of maritime law. The human delegation exchanged glances that somehow managed to communicate volumes without a single word. It was the kind of silent coordination that prey species developed when predators were nearby, except the roles seemed oddly reversed. Well, Thorne continued, his voice maintaining that same helpful tone he might use to explain parking regulations, I'm afraid this does present us with something of a procedural challenge.